a little bit further off to where there's also a shopping center. I mean, it's about traffic, and that traffic also encompasses minors as well as adults. And so when you're talking about convenience, the reality is that when you locate in these areas, it's making it convenient for folks regardless of age. And so from that perspective, I think that we need to think about it from that perspective. I know it's hard. You know, these are businesses who are trying to do the right thing for the most part, and, you know, a lot of times deliver a product that people enjoy, or are presenting a product that may be used for smoking cessation. But the reality is that the more we put this out in front of our kids, the more challenging it's going to be. And so from that perspective, that's the reason why I feel as though going with the model that we have with the half a mile is something that's reasonable.
I would just also add that every medical professional we've spoken to and that has testified has talked about the fact that with these vape products in particular, because although relatively they've been around for a while, it's only in the last 2 years that they have really picked up steam, that they've really picked up interest. And so
the vaping shops,
correct,
the so-called specialty
just the products that they're selling, not the shops themselves, just the actual vape products.
Okay.
And we've heard particularly from pulmonologists that there will be more long-term longitudinal studies, but what they are seeing initially with patients that they are treating is that these products, although they've nefariously been marketed as being safer than cigarette use and tobacco use, over the long run, they don't believe they will be. And the cases that they're seeing are substantial. So it's not that these products are, they may help you. Exactly.
They're still bad for you.
That's right.
I mean, I want to say, like, from a 30,000 feet, like, I think these products are designed to perpetuate your addiction.
Correct.
Fundamentally. Mm-hmm. They help some people move from burning cigarettes to this other product, but then they try to keep you doing that for as long as they possibly can.
Right.
And, you know, I'm a former smoker, and ultimately you have to want to quit. And, like, it doesn't matter what product you use, you have to want to quit. And these are not intended to help you want to quit.
That's correct.
They're intended to help you want to continue using them. And, you know, that said, some people will, you know, we need a lot more aggressive regulation at every level. There are other ways to quit. One thing I keep going back to is, if you really want to quit, A, you just have to do it, and B, there are drugs that actually work more effectively than vaping. Mm-hmm. You can get a prescription, and the science is very clear that you will be more successful in quitting with a Chantix type product that actually helps you regulate that. That vaping is maybe a path out of combustible, but, you know, some people are able to use it to then entirely quit, but, you know, many people just keep vaping indefinitely. And, you know, that is also going to be a problem. If you vape for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to die of something else related to that, you know. And, of course, we don't really know what the long-term health implications are of it. My strongest passion here is, of course, around children and young people. And I do think it's clear that they use those other types of devices mostly. You know, that seems to be what the evidence is showing, is it's those, you know, those little USB type devices that have created the epidemic. And so, you know, we're trying to, like, understand, I guess, how all these things fit together. And I think by moving from a mile to a half mile, this is a measured approach that allows for some shops to, there will still be shops. They will be operating in a regulatory environment that will then be determined by other measures that we have adopted around flavors, or the state, preferably the state and federal government would adopt around flavors. As you know, I proposed a flavor ban, but I don't think it works very well, you know, because you can still order online, and a lot of people are going to order online, and that's, you know, an underlying problem for us. So until the federal government takes action to deal with the manufacturer's ability to make products in the first place that can then be sold online, I think we're ultimately swimming upstream. Good morning, Isan. How are you? That's okay. It's almost always at 9:30, but we moved it today, especially at 9 o'clock. But you are it's totally fine. All right. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks. It's been an important discussion, I think, of what is clearly a complicated issue, and I think it reflects, as you were just saying, a couple things. One, this is an epidemic that we are all desperate to try to get our hands around. There isn't a parent, a principal, a teacher, a lot of students that I have spoken to over the last 15 months being in office that this hasn't come up as part of the conversation and the helplessness that our education professionals and our parents are trying to grapple with. And I think that this is reflective of that, and in that way, I really appreciate the leadership of Councilmember Albornoz and Councilmember Rice on this, and all the work that the HHS committee has done. I mean, this is the land use portion of it, but really a lot of the important and critical work in addressing this issue has been dealt with at the Health and Human Services Committee. I think it also reflects the limitations that we have in dealing with this, and I think some of the concerns that I really appreciate Councilmember Reamer and Jawando mentioning earlier are this issue that we're not really equipped like the state and the federal government are to enforce, as Councilmember Rice was mentioning, and prohibit certain products in certain stores. I mean, that really isn't what we're set up to do. We don't have the resources for it, and frankly, the laws aren't even set up particularly well for us to do it. And so there is a little bit of a square peg, round hole of trying to get on top of what is clearly a growing health crisis among our young people that we need to address, but also recognizing that we are limited, and it's a challenge to be able to do that. And I am, as Chair Reamer mentioned, I don't take lightly that this is an aggressive action that has significant impacts on a number of businesses, and that's not something that I take lightly at all. I think certainly moving to the half mile is helpful, to address that balance, as was mentioned earlier, and I think the 2 years as well. I mean, it is not a light action of local government to force a business to move. I mean, that is not a small gesture by any stretch of the imagination, but it will still allow them to exist. It doesn't completely regulate them out of business. And, it's just a real challenge that we face of how do we address this? How do we do what is our number one priority, responsibility, and obligation as a local government and as people in public office, which is to keep our young people safe and to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to mitigate the risk that is posed to them on a daily basis. So I appreciate also what Chair Reamer has said and the very compelling comments that you made, Chairman Reamer, at the introduction of these bills and this ZTA about your history. It's not something that I'm as familiar with. I'm not a smoker. I've never been a smoker, but I've seen it in my own family. I have a family member who early on when I was very young, and that had significant health implications as well that turned our whole family upside down for a while. So, and it was another example of starting the addiction early and not getting out of it until too late. So I'm not something I take lightly at all, not something that I don't appreciate. I thought that some of the business owners who came and testified at the public hearing gave compelling testimony that they are trying. I do believe that they are, but I think that we're struggling and trying as desperately as we can to wrap our heads around this epidemic and make sure that we're keeping our kids safe and trying our best to strike an appropriate and reasonable balance.
Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And appreciate Councilman Friedson's comments. I agree. I'm getting more frustrated as I sit here because I'm really mad at the federal government and the state haven't done more and put us in this situation where we're using a blunt instrument to try to conduct surgery. Again, as I said in my first comments, I think on balance we have to do it because we have to do what's best for our children and for our families and try to protect them from this epidemic. But it's really, whether it's the flavors, it's like a repeat. As I mentioned when we introduced these set of bills, I worked on the FDA tobacco regulation issue, and that was a huge problem then with these flavored, types of cigarettes. And I agree with Councilman Friedson. I think the people, I was actually just reviewing some of the testimony here from Vapor Worldwide in Gaithersburg, and a letter that was written in, and talking about what they try to do and how they're looking forward to enforcing the 21, one of the actions that was taken at the state level to move the age from 18 to 21. And that, kids are going to go online or to 7-Eleven. And yes, that might all be true, but we have to do what we have to do with the authority that we have. And, but I did want to say, I really hope, that federal government and the governor and others will move to give us more tools or to take the authority that they have to get these types of flavors and products out of all stores. I mean, because, we obviously, if we could address some of these other retail or online options, we would, and we can't. And so I just am really frustrated by it, but I did want to say that it wasn't it's not easy decision, because I know there are people who are out here trying to do the right thing, but I appreciate my colleagues for introducing it. I think, again, number one priority for us is making sure we're protecting our children and protecting families.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just final two comments. We've gotten a lot of correspondence from other local jurisdictions, both regionally and nationally, regarding these particular bills, because local jurisdictions share our frustration with the federal government's inaction on this, and all of them are looking to figure out how locally they can legislate. And so I do think that beyond the impact here in the county, should we proceed, and I think we will, this will hopefully have an impact where local jurisdictions force the federal government to take stronger action. So I do think in that regard. The timing of this, I think, is important because, the bills were introduced originally in November. We've been holding off to try and consolidate everything, and we are looking at the end of March to be able to vote on all these bills collectively. So our hope is that we can proceed out of committee, but if we don't, and it's completely up to the committee's decision, and no problem either way. But I would propose that we continue to move forward with the HHS portion of this, regardless of where we go today, so that we can move this forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I think we're ready to move forward. And Amanda?
I did just want to note for you, starting on page 3, there are two amendments, just clarifying amendments to the ZTA. One we already spoke about briefly, to ensure that the ZTA defines a vape shop as an establishment that devotes at least 51% as opposed to 51% exactly. That was essentially my error, not including that in the introduced version, so that amendment should be made. Additionally, the planning board and planning staff had raised an interesting question about what an established middle or high school is, and so they had recommended looking at whether or not we should tie that what is established to the use and occupancy permit. So I have drafted an amendment on page 4 that I'll just read it to you. It says, for purposes of these standards, a vape shop or a school is established when the Department of Permitting Services issues a use and occupancy permit. I would suggest both of those amendments for your consideration.
Is that sort of like the who was here first issue?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any additional comments? All right. We have legislation before us. Committee members, all those in favor? All right.
With amendments?
With amendments? Yes. Thank you. We're done.